There are 5 phases that every idea that has global impact will go through. Now, some of you would say, well, God has called me to start a church. Some of you would say, God has given me a message. As some would say, whatever it is that you believe God has called you to. But in the end, you believe God has planted something inside of you, and that something inside of you must move and grow from Eden to the rest of the earth. And in growing, it must still be Eden. It must be Eden in Eden. If it gets to another place, it must still be Eden. If it extends from there, it must be Eden. Wherever it goes, it must be Eden. So Eden must be expanded, or the vision, the dream, the seed, whatever you call it, has to be expanded and still maintain its integrity. So 5 things, 5 phases an idea will go through, a mission, a calling would go through. The first one is that it must extend. And when I say extend, I mean it must stretch limits. So that's the first thing, you have to extend. So if you are Adam, you must stretch limits. You must stretch the limits of Eden. You must ensure that Eden is not just in a small spot, but it keeps growing and expanding. So every idea, every mission, every grace, every anointing that God gives a person must have the ability to extend. That's the first quality. The second quality is that it has to be able to contend. It has to fight opposition. Now, there are ideas that people have, ministries that people have, that are not able to extend. And many times they are not able to extend simply because of opposition, contentions, difficulties, challenges, and many people's ministries just die at this level because they're not able to extend. Why? They can't contend. I started our church in 1984 in a classroom. And in the classroom, we started with just a few people. And even in that small classroom, there were other churches in different parts of the school compound who were also doing church in the classrooms. Of course, over the years, our church moved from the classroom, moved to different locations and cinema halls and so on, as most churches do, built our own place and kept building and so on and so forth. But some of the churches we were in the classroom with kept being in the same classroom. Now, I cannot explain all the factors why they stayed in the classroom, but I suppose if you talk to them, they would say, well, we don't have rich men in our church, our people are not committed, our people are not engaging, they're not prayerful, whatever. They'll give you some reason why after 20, 30 years, they're still in the same place. But the reason they gave you is because there was opposition and they couldn't contend. Every idea is going to fight off something. It's going to fight off something. And just get this, opposition is natural. And it's normal. It's actually necessary to help us to flex the grace that God has given to us, flex the anointing so you can go beyond where you are. So an idea must extend, the idea must contend, and the third, very important, the idea must amend. It must change or transform. When you meet new challenges in the process of extension, you're going to meet certain challenges that force you to change. They will force you to change. Your strategies may change. Your main idea may not change, but how you apply it will change. And in the process of changing, you become a better version of what you have. So let me put it this way. So if you were Adam and Eve, and you're trying to extend Eden. And let's say Eden is somewhere in the Middle East with high temperatures, 40 degrees, 45 degrees Celsius, very, very hot. So that's what you're used to, very hot. And then as you're expanding your Eden, you get to Northern Europe, you get to Sweden, and you realize that Sweden is not Saudi Arabia, or Sweden is not the Middle East. Sweden is a very cold country. Finland is cold. Norway is cold. Now, you cannot say that, oh, well, in Eden, this is how we dress, and so this is the same way I'm going to dress as my territory is expanding. No, in Norway, you still have Eden, but you're going to present yourself differently. You're going to dress differently. And then you're going to find out that certain things you were eating probably in the original Eden, like dates and so on, you don't find them in other territories. So you're going to change your diet. And you're going to change and change and change and change and adapt so that you can fit into the new geographical space that God has placed you in. One of the most dynamic things about the Christian faith is its adaptability. And that is why Christianity is a world religion, because wherever it goes, it tries to adapt and it tries to work with a new space. And if you look at some of the early missionaries that came to our part of the world, they learned our language. They learned to eat our food. They learned to talk like us. As a matter of fact, most African languages were first written not by Africans, but by missionaries. They came, learned our language, and created an alphabet for us. Learned our language, learned our culture, wrote books about our culture, navigated our land, did the mapping for our land. Most of the maps we have of our countries were done by foreigners. What were they doing? They were amending. They were adapting. And in adapting, they were able to influence us. Now, conversely, you can have an African who goes to live, maybe an African goes to start a church in Norway or starts a church in Sweden. If he's a Ghanaian, he wants to have a Ghanaian church. If he's Nigerian, wants to have a Nigerian church and still wants to have global impact. How are you going to do it if your church is only suitable to those who are with you in Eden at the original location, but is not adaptable to the new location? There has to be amendment. And the amendment is not amendment of calling. It's not amendment of your seed or the idea that God has planted in you. It is the amendment of how to execute this mandate in different locations. Because the work of God is done by different people in different ways. Take Daniel. Daniel is in Babylon. In Jerusalem, when Daniel lives in Jerusalem, as a Jew, there is one God. There is one temple. There is one Ark of the Covenant. That everybody thought like him. Everybody prayed like him. Everybody believed like him. It's an easy place to be and to do life if you were Daniel. And then one day Babylon takes control of Judah. Now, one of the things that God has said to Israel, even when he was talking about the dispersal, it was a means by which the knowledge of God will get to the other nations of the world. It came through persecution. It came through their being conquered, but God wanted to infuse his knowledge into Babylon, into Persia, into other parts of the world. So by means of a very difficult national situation, the Israelites are spread all over the world. And Daniel goes to Babylon. And Babylon, they've never even heard about Yahweh, the God of the Jews. They don't have one temple dedicated to God. They have different temples dedicated to different gods. They believe very differently, talk very differently, And Daniel has to find a way to expand in Babylon. How's he going to do it? And if you read the book of Daniel, I teach about that in the corridors of power, and how to survive in the corridors of power. One of the critical things Daniel had to do is to learn the language of the Babylonians. He had to learn to work with the thought, the philosophy, the culture of the Babylonians. He had to sometimes be where their gods are. He had to, I don't know the extent he went. He integrated so much that the Babylonians had confidence in him to make him an advisor to the king. If he wasn't properly integrated, he couldn't be made an advisor to the king. But as much as he was integrated, he kept his Eden. He kept his faith in God. And he would pray constantly towards Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, one of the ways to trap Daniel was the predictability of his faith, that he would not denounce his faith. But by not denouncing his faith meant to pull away from Babylon. He had to find a way to work in Babylon and infuse Babylon with the principles of God. Same with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They took on those names that were Babylonian, but never took on Babylonian faith. There's always a difference between knowing something and believing something. We must know the world and understand how it functions, but we must also know the core of our belief and never compromise it. So amending is important. And if there's one thing I feel that the church in Africa has to learn, and learn to do it well as we are expanding all over the world, is that we don't go and try to plant Africa in those countries, whether it's Nigeria or Ghana or wherever, that we learn to amend and do things differently to fit the cultures and the people that God has called us to. The way to preach the gospel to one group is not the same way to preach to another group. In Africa, people are looking for miracles. In other places, they are not looking for miracles. They are looking for something else. They are looking for logic. They are looking for a faith that makes sense. Not just a faith that moves, but a faith that makes sense. So there has to be amendment. And some of you may be called by God to do things that are very different. And sometimes the tragedy, I see a lot of it in our part of the world, is we look at a success model and all of us want to be like the success model. But sometimes the success model is not supposed to be a model for everybody, because God can birth new things. As you amend, you can change, you can transform, you can learn new strategies, and just fit into a new context with what he has given to you. So the 5 phases: extend, contend, amend, and then the 4th is transcend. I think in a sense I've already go beyond. And that's what I was saying about Daniel. He amended, but he also transcended. He went above. He didn't integrate into Babylon so that Babylon would dominate him. He went above Babylon. He went beyond, so much so that his life, his testimony affected 4 different kings, 2 in Babylon, 2 in Persia. What a testimony. Over 70 years, even when the Persians took over the Babylonian system, Daniel was retained, and he was very effective. So he transcended. He went beyond. Now, sometimes in amending, some people get destroyed, so they don't transcend, but we have to transcend. And then finally, the 5th one is defend, protect. Whatever we achieve must be protected. You protect your advantage. If you rise to the top, you don't come back to the bottom. If God lifts you up, you don't drop. Puts you on the mountain, you don't drop to the valley. If God makes you great, you don't destroy the greatness. And we've seen it many times in ministry where people expand, they grow, and then the growth destroys them. But I believe that will not be our testimony. We're going to expand, and we're going to extend, we're going to contend, we're going to amend, we're going to transcend, and we're going to defend what we have and be a blessing to our world.